The world awoke on Friday, June 13, 2025, to the startling news that Israel had launched a major military strike against Iran. The attacks targeted sensitive locations, including nuclear facilities and ballistic missile factories, escalating an already tense situation in the Middle East. As reports of the bold operation spread globally, all eyes turned to Washington, D.C. The international community anxiously awaited a response from the White House, wondering what President Donald Trump knew and what the United States would do next. The event marked a critical turning point, pushing the region closer to a wider conflict and testing the bonds between the U.S. and its closest allies in the volatile theater. It soon became clear that the Israeli operation was not a surprise to the American government. High-level officials within the Trump administration later confirmed that the White House had received prior notification of Israel's plans. President Trump himself revealed this foreknowledge, stating plainly, "We knew everything." This admission underscored the deep intelligence sharing and strategic coordination that exists between the two nations. For months, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had been advocating for decisive action against Iran's growing nuclear program, a concern shared by Washington. The prior warning allowed the U.S. to prepare for the inevitable fallout from such a significant military action. Despite this advance notice, the situation was far from simple for the United States. President Trump disclosed that he had initially tried to persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu to delay the attack. The American president's hope was to allow more time for diplomatic channels to work, specifically the ongoing nuclear negotiations with Iran. However, after Israel proceeded with the strikes, President Trump's public tone shifted to one of firm support for his ally. He praised the operation, calling it a very successful attack and describing it as excellent. This dual response highlighted the complex position of the U.S., wanting to support its ally, while also attempting to manage and de-escalate a rapidly intensifying crisis. While the White House maintained that the United States had no direct combat role in the initial Israeli raids, American military forces were not entirely on the sidelines. In the immediate aftermath of the strikes, Iran launched a retaliatory barrage of missiles aimed at Israel. It was at this critical moment that U.S. involvement became evident. Two American officials confirmed that the U.S. military actively assisted in intercepting and shooting down the incoming Iranian projectiles. This defensive action demonstrated a clear commitment to Israel's security, proving that while the U.S. may not have participated in the offense, it was fully prepared to aid in the defense of its partner nation. In the hours following the Israeli attack, President Trump took to social media and official channels to deliver a series of stark warnings directly to Tehran. His message was clear and uncompromising: negotiate now or face further consequences. In a phone call and subsequent posts, he urged Iran's leaders to come to the bargaining table to finalize a nuclear deal before there is nothing left. This public pressure campaign was a direct attempt to leverage the Israeli military action to force Iran's hand. The president's statements were a blend of threat and invitation, framing the diplomatic path as the only way for Iran to avoid what he suggested could be even more brutal Israeli attacks in the future. Adding a layer of personal urgency to the situation, President Trump pointed out a significant detail regarding the timing of the strike. He noted that the Israeli attack had occurred on the 61st day after he had set a 60-day deadline for Iran to agree to a new nuclear arrangement. This detail was not a coincidence in the president's view. He believed the strike was a direct result of Iran's failure to meet his ultimatum. By connecting the attack to his own deadline, Trump positioned the military escalation as an outcome that he had predicted and warned against, thereby placing the responsibility for the crisis squarely on the Iranian government for not engaging seriously in the negotiations he had proposed earlier. The president's response was managed from the highest levels of the U.S. government, involving constant communication and strategic planning. President Trump held several phone conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu both before and after the strikes, ensuring the two leaders were in lockstep. He also convened his National Security Council in the White House Situation Room for an emergency briefing to assess the rapidly evolving events. Later, he met with his top national security advisors at the presidential retreat, Camp David, to deliberate on the next steps for the United States, underscoring the gravity with which his administration was treating the unfolding crisis in the Middle East. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reinforced the official American position, making it clear that the U.S. was not a direct combatant in this specific conflict. In public statements, Rubio emphasized that the United States had no direct role or involvement in planning or executing the Israeli strikes. This carefully worded clarification was crucial for diplomatic reasons, as it aimed to contain the conflict and prevent it from automatically drawing American forces into a direct war with Iran. The message was intended to signal to the world that while the U.S. stood by Israel, its actions were distinct, preserving a degree of strategic flexibility for Washington as it navigated the dangerous aftermath. Before the military confrontation, there had been a fragile glimmer of hope for a diplomatic resolution. A sixth round of nuclear talks between the United States and Iran, brokered by Oman, was scheduled to take place on Sunday, June 15, 2025. The American delegation was to be led by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who was tasked with finding a peaceful path forward. These negotiations were seen as a last-ditch effort to revive a deal that would curb Iran's nuclear ambitions in exchange for sanctions relief. The international community watched these planned talks with cautious optimism, hoping they could pull the region back from the brink of war. However, even before the first Israeli jets took to the skies, the prospects for these talks were rapidly diminishing. President Trump's optimism for a breakthrough had already started to fade. The primary reason for this pessimism was a major setback in the negotiations. Iran's supreme leader had publicly rejected a key U.S. proposal. The American plan called for a phased-out elimination of Iran's uranium enrichment capabilities, a core demand from Washington. Iran's refusal to consider this fundamental point created a significant impasse, suggesting that the diplomatic track was already on the verge of collapse long before the military option was exercised. The Israeli strike on Friday served as the final decisive blow to the already faltering peace process. In the wake of the attack, which Iran viewed as an act of war supported by the United States, the likelihood of the scheduled Sunday meeting proceeding plummeted to virtually zero. The aggressive military action made it politically impossible for Iranian leaders to sit down with American diplomats. The attack not only destroyed physical targets, but also shattered the delicate and minimal trust required to engage in high-stakes negotiations, leaving the diplomatic pathway in ruins and pushing the two sides further apart than ever before. The escalation had not occurred in a vacuum. Tensions had been steadily rising for weeks, particularly after the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IEA, passed a resolution declaring Iran to be in non-compliance with its nuclear commitments. This declaration prompted Iran to accelerate its nuclear activities, further alarming Israel and the United States. For weeks, Prime Minister Netanyahu had urged President Trump to take a harder line against Iran. Though Trump had warned Netanyahu against a premature attack just 2 weeks prior, the combination of diplomatic failure and Iran's nuclear advancements ultimately set the stage for Israel's decisive and dangerous military intervention. The White House's primary responsibility, beyond managing the geopolitical crisis, was ensuring the safety and security of American citizens and personnel in the Middle East. Recognizing the heightened risk of a broader conflict, the Trump administration had already begun taking precautionary measures in the days leading up to the Israeli strike. The U.S. government quietly withdrew non-essential diplomats from its embassy in Iraq, a country with a significant presence of Iran-backed militias. Furthermore, it authorized the voluntary departure of family members of U.S. military personnel stationed across the region, signaling that the administration was preparing for a worst-case scenario. Immediately after the strikes and Iran's retaliatory missile fire, President Trump escalated these protective measures dramatically. Citing the imminent risk of a massive conflict that could engulf the region, he issued an order for all non-essential U.S. personnel to leave the Middle East. This decisive action was a clear indication that the administration believed the situation could spiral out of control at any moment. The evacuation order aimed to minimize the number of potential American casualties if hostilities were to expand, demonstrating a commitment to prioritizing the lives of U.S. citizens above all else during this period of extreme uncertainty and danger. In summary, the White House navigated a complex and perilous situation with a multifaceted approach. First, it acknowledged its foreknowledge of the Israeli attack, a testament to its close alliance with Israel. Second, President Trump publicly backed the strike while revealing his initial attempts to favor a diplomatic timeline, a posture that supported an ally while also managing perceptions of American intent. Third, the U.S. military provided direct defensive aid to Israel against retaliation, cementing its commitment to Israel's security. This step-by-step reaction showcased a White House trying to balance unwavering support for an ally with the urgent need to prevent a full-scale regional war. Ultimately, the events of the past few days have left the Middle East in a more precarious and dangerous state. The collapse of diplomatic talks, combined with the direct military confrontation between Israel and Iran, has significantly raised the stakes for everyone involved. The White House's response, a combination of public warnings, strategic ambiguity, military assistance, and protective measures for its citizens, reflects the difficult tightrope it must walk. As the world watches, the administration's next moves will be critical in determining whether the region can pull back from the abyss or if it is destined for a wider, more devastating conflict.